Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the High Talks podcast. Today, I'm joined by Canadian Alex Saint Germain and American Nick. Nick, how do you say your
It's
last
fine.
name?
It's
Nick,
fine.
just Nick, just Nick. It's just Nick, everyone. Um, Today, we're going to be talking mostly about the trucker. How would you say this, Alex? Is it just the trucker caravan? Is it the trucker convoy? What is
Uh,
being commonly
no,
used around
no
you?
real term. This is I call it the trucker. I call it the trucker revolt, but it's just the trucker convoy for freedom.
Okay. Okay, and this is correct me where I'm mistaken. This is about the not the vaccine mandate, but the mask mandate, right? Or is it the vaccine mandate? Like, what are they protesting?
Well, that's something I want to clarify. Yes, the vaccine mandate is it's front page news, but if you talk to a lot of the protesters, their concerns go far beyond just the vaccines. It's bad enough that in the past couple of years, just like in the States, we've been restricted to our homes or restricted from visiting families. And one of the concerns that I heard brought up recently, especially by an ex political figure, Peckford, who he's arguing that Trudeau has been shirking his responsibility as far as the Constitution is concerned. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing in the Constitution that can prevent um, people from traveling across Canada, visiting families, going to churches, and what have you. Jordan Peterson uh, had a meeting with him, a discussion with him, talking about this. And I think this is the issue that a lot of Canadians have. It's not just about the mandate, but over his tenure, and this is his second term as prime minister, um, more and more rights are being taken away.
Mm-hmm.
We have like Bill C-16, which is the a language bill, the very gray area of hate crime that's been brought up in the House of Commons. It's limiting our speech. So Canadians, I think, have reached the point. Enough is enough. We're tired of the government mandating how we live our lives,
Right.
and the mandate was perhaps just the final straw.
Okay. Do you know anything about mandates in America in comparison to how it is in Canada? Is Canada far worse right now? I don't know much about Canadian politics.
Well, I think the one thing you have in the States is the first, I believe it's the First Amendment, freedom of speech,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's guaranteed in your Constitution. We your in your Constitution, it was pursuit of the about rights, the pursuit of happiness. In our Constitution, it's peace, order, and good government. The question is, who establishes the good government? Who sets that standard?
Right.
And yeah, so I have concerns about that. That we don't have as many rights as you guys have, especially around free speech. Up
Right.
up here, you've got to be very careful what you say and how you say it.
There's a bunch of peddling laws that restrict what you as an individual should be able to do as a free thinking adult, right?
Well, it all falls under like this, like the idea, like I mentioned, the idea of hate speech, or speech that can be considered as racist,
Mm-hmm.
um, what have you, and it dominates our educational system. So if you want to disagree or debate an issue, you have to be very careful how you do that. Professors are very leery, very concerned about what they teach and how they teach and what they say, in fear of having to face some wicked tribunal within the university institution itself. And that's starting to spread into the public forum. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think this is what's been driving. the undercurrent that's been driving the
trucker convoy.
truckers' revolt.
The Freedom Convoy, I hear it's called sometimes.
Yeah,
I see.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
So it's kind of like how things in Australia are, how you have freedoms, but you don't have certain freedoms given to you by a constitution like America does. So there's more leeway for the government to restrict those freedoms, basically that they shouldn't be touching. Am I right?
Well, to me, it's like you can't legislate um, freedom. Let's put it that way. For example, like for what I mean by that is you can't.
Can we get a little examples, maybe? Can we get a little bit like we're kind of vague. Like what specifically is the government preventing people from saying that what speech exactly are we chilling? What professors are
Well,
scared of their lessons plan? Just
in
is there any
Well,
examples?
that's
Australia,
the
it's kind of like the idea you can't, if I'm not mistaken, you can't go out and protest or you can't hang out with your friends out in Australia because of everyone's being forced to be indoors and people are protesting that.
but in Canada too. It's not clear. That's one of the major problems. Uh, what is hate? Okay, who defines hate? Um, what can I say as far as let's say like Bill C-16, which is the trans language bill, where we have like what 100 different pronouns, and you have to accept that, and like,
You do, Alex. You
and if
have to accept it.
uh,
Yeah, actually, you bring
if
up a very
but
valid point. You bring
but
up something. Someone I know, Christopher Hitch. Well, I don't know him, but his name is Christopher Hitchens. He spoke at University of Toronto in 2006, 2007, where he said he was talking about something very much to the vein of what you're saying. Is there anyone in Canada that you will deem good enough to decide what I can read or hear, or write, or any or say? Is there anyone in Canada good enough to do this that you would like to dictate for you what you may read, what you may write,
yeah,
what you may say? There's no one, no
Trudeau.
hands up. I had no idea.
Trudeau Trudeau is the one that dictates that. I mean, it's under his
Mm.
leadership that much of these laws and are being passed.
Wasn't
It's a
Trudeau
very
elected? Didn't he run for?
communication should. Sorry.
But wasn't Trudeau elected? Like the majority of Canadians did vote for, like plurality at least voted for Trudeau's party, right?
Yeah, well, Trudeau won by a majority the first round. Now it's a minority government, and you'd think that would minority governments tend to be quite
COVID
work out quite
19.
well. It's not. It's not. Doesn't work very well. Um, and Trudeau's leadership has, if anything, become more draconian.
Yeah, that's how
And
I heard it
he
be described
talks.
before.
His idea his idea of leadership and freedom is to create laws and what have you to give people the delusion that they are free. Going back to for example, the trans or
Bill C-16.
the Bill C-16. Um, what, as far as I'm concerned, what the agreement I have between another individual. So if someone comes to me, him or herself, or they don't want to use him or her, and we come to a negotiated agreement, this is what how I want to be presented. I don't have a problem with that. But when the government comes in and tells me what I cannot say, or what I must say, or how I must say it, that's treading on very dangerous ground.
Right.
And I'm sure it's happening in the States too. There's a sensitivity. It's almost becoming pathological
Yeah.
that words matter, and as such, there are many schools that take books off of shelves or refuse to have them taught in schools because it'll have a particular word or descriptive
I mean,
that
words
will be
do matter. They
offensive to
just don't
someone.
matter like so much. Like when it comes to like the influence. the only power words have is the power you give it, I think. Other than that, like the only time I think words matter when someone says that, I think, yeah, words matter. We should use words correctly. But you're talking about
Well, I
like
think,
people being overly sensitive to and having knee-jerk
well,
reactions
yeah,
to certain words,
I
right?
think I can't speak for the states, but I'm sure
Hmm.
it's perhaps the same. We're very politically polarized up here,
Yeah.
and people are very overly sensitive to words that are being used. It's there's no sense of unity. One of the things that Trudeau commented, and that this concerns me. He says that Canada is a postmodern nation. It doesn't have a core value or a core culture, if you will. Now I'm a 12th generation Canadian. I kind of deny that. I mean, we do have a core principle, a core belief system, and a culture, but it gets, how should we say, it gets lost in multicultural translation. And even multiculturalism I'm against, because and I voiced this many years ago, and I also wrote letters to the government. You can't legislate culture, and that's what multiculturalism is. Now, when I've gone to the States, like let's say New York City, um, you have different cultural communities, and they're thriving. They don't need to be told what they are. They know who they are. But the Canadian government takes on this role.
Yeah.
Well, isn't but isn't like some cultures in our, especially that there have been cultures that have been like driven towards almost extinction, where the government does like have an interest in, I guess, helping them out or something. I don't know. Like there is
Well,
some,
You mean like
like
the
obviously there's, I don't know,
I
like there's
I would
some
argue.
languages with like 10 people left in them, or something like that, and the state might have an interest in helping that culture
they
Well,
do more
culture,
harm than
okay, but
good.
stay alive.
historically, from an anthropological point of view, I mean, cultures develop, they peak, they die. It's the natural order of things. I mean, you try to sustain cultures, of course. I fully support that, especially like in the case of indigenous cultures. When I was a boy, we knew nothing about the art that Native Canadians produced, their legends, their history, and what have you. Now it's part, now, which I totally agree with. It's now part of our history lesson. However, it's how it's taught. Now, I believe in intellectual honesty. I believe very much that if you're going to learn history, as much as possible, you learn the good and the bad.
Hmm.
And like, for example, what would happen to the institutional the schools where Native children were taken from their parents, and I guess you've heard about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, there was. It's on social media has
Yeah,
been very
I
active.
mean, anyone would agree that that was wrong. What
Mhm.
McDonald was trying to do, especially back in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, was not to destroy the native, but to destroy the native within the native. And you've probably heard about the discovery of the unmarked graves. Well, the
Yeah.
media, which I have little respect for, built on that on a lie that these were unknown, undiscovered. Uh, it was an attempt to hide a genocide. The fact is, none of it was true.
Okay.
That these grave sites were actually known. They were forgotten, of course, over time, like many grave sites, and not all the bodies that they discovered in the ground were native. A lot of white people, especially the poor, were buried in paupers' graves, unmarked graves, or they just had a wooden marker, which over time would just decay. But they built on this and made it into something that just didn't exist. And because of that, last year,
Hmm.
celebrating Canada Day was looked upon as an anathema. How dare you? How can you celebrate Canada Day? You should be ashamed of yourself. And I'm sorry, I totally disagreed with that. But Canada, and this is again part of the, I think, part of the anger that Canadians are feeling. are tired of being told you're all bad because you're white, for example. Well, I mean, if you listen to Trudeau when he was doing his presentation, he feigns this hurt, this pain, like I feel your pain kind of language. That the truckers' drive for freedom is led by a bunch of redneck white supremacists, and the media played along, and it just displays that kind of genre. But if you if you start watching the what I call the shadow media, like YouTube and what have you, there were a lot of drivers who are men, women of color, men of color, but that you see that's not shown. That we don't want that narrative to be
but
shared.
they don't have to do very much because all they see is, what I was saying earlier was all they need to see is one Confederate flag and a swastika with that group, and it's,
Well, yeah, that's it.
I'm
That's
just
painful.
pointing out that it doesn't take that much work to put on
That,
social media and then, whether or not they have like good grievances or not, it's gonna be, that kind of wrecks the movement, if you know what I mean.
exactly. I mean, how do you control that? That's just the thing. How do you control that? You're going to find uh, 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 miscreants that are going to use an event to push their own agenda. But if you're an intelligent person, you'll learn to separate the that kind of nonsense with the real driving force behind this push. Now you have to understand something too about Canadians. We're not like Americans. Americans, for the most part, they're much more entrepreneurial in their history. Okay, John and Jane Q. Public, they got on a wagon and they blazed the trails, and we were a bit more protective. We had the protection of the Queen or the King, whichever part of history you're referring to, and we believed very much in law. We never had a revolution. Canada was a country that came about. Through contracts, if you will, agreements and understandings. So we're a very law-abiding nation. It's only maybe 3 or 4 times in history has there been a march to Ottawa. I've experienced two myself. Then there's this one, and another one I consider very important was the On to Ottawa trek in 1935 during the Depression years. At least Bennett had the guts to meet with representatives, whereas Trudeau is off hiding somewhere. But for Canadians to come out of the cold, drive across Canada, meet in a location in the thousands, and what we talk about the truckers, what they don't talk about is what about all the people that were on the roads waving the flags and cheering them on? And Trudeau has the nerve to say this is just a fringe group of white extremists. Is he so pompous as to treat or deal with these protesters in such a way? He's burying himself in a pit. Now there has been hints that he could call in the army. Now he hasn't said that as a fact, but he also hasn't disregarded the idea of bringing in the army. And I wrote something today, actually, and I'm challenging him, are you actually going to declare war on your own people?
Speaking of
the only
which,
time the army has... Yeah.
I was going to say this video I have pulled up, I wanted to share with you too. It might infuriate you about what I think it's the transportation minister, what he has to say. He basically...
Oh, yes, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard.
Hundreds of truckers are en route to
Mr. Singh.
Yeah?
The head of the NDP party.
What
I used to be
say?
Well, he's basically pushing the same narrative. Now, when he looks upon Canada as a country where where people of color, people who are Islamic, Sikh, basically any member of a minority group, Canada is a country where they get murdered.
Yeah.
Now, for a politician to say such a thing because of one stupid maniac, most Canadians, 99% of Canadians, they don't give a care what you are.
Yeah,
We're
that's
a
how most
very
people really are all over. It's like
yeah.
that in the West Coast. They're not all social justice warriors. In the South, they're not all racist. They're usually more libertarian. So it seems to be a common thing that most people are generally fine. They're good people. Like they're not out for blood.
Uh,
Well, but I mean,
CTV.
at least
What, Nick?
what people.
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, but at least I would just say that I mean, how how here's a question: how many Confederate flags were showing up at the march? Just wonder.
Well, what does it mean when they're showing that? It
I
doesn't
don't know how
necessarily mean
many.
that they're racist. We have to understand the person
I'm just
who
telling you
put it
that
up and understand their
when
reasoning.
when Americans see that or see a Nazi flag, when like some of these groups, like when it came to the protest in against the vaccine mandates in the state capitals, or
Okay.
during the Trump rallies, the Kaplan's Russian, and anything that involved right wing attempts to preserve culture in
Like
America.
the "You Will Not Replace Us" group, the
Yeah,
tiki torches. Unite the
anytime,
Right.
yeah, I remember those guys. Yeah, I like those guys. Whenever you have these movements that maybe like protest against cultural or government
Appropriation.
infringement,
Okay.
I just saying whenever those flags show up, the signal to most Americans or a lot of Americans is I don't want to I don't want to be a part of that. I'm afraid of that. I don't, if you had a
But how do you
different,
know what most Americans are thinking? We don't really know. I mean, you say most
I can
Americans in
tell
what
you that I can
scale?
tell
A
you,
large number of Americans in the whole American populace, or just like individually, like 1,000 could be considered a
I
lot.
think it
But
just turns a lot. I just think it turns a lot of people off. I just think
okay,
it's
yeah, sure,
Okay.
I can see that.
I think that's how movements go to.
But just because someone has that flag and people have that
Yeah.
knee jerk reaction, that doesn't mean anything, though. That's just, I
Well,
mean,
okay.
we're arguing from
I
what
have
people's first reaction is. I mean, if
I
I
can
saw
say
this
okay. Let
truck
me.
right here in the video that has a Confederate flag on it, I'm curious as to why do they have it.
Yeah, but
Okay. Let me share something though from a Canadian perspective.
Sure.
For us, when I see somebody up here with their Confederate flag, what they're not saying, or okay, they're not necessarily saying, I believe in white supremacy and what have you. It's what the flag represented, a rebel, a person that goes against the grain.
Yeah.
Most people are uneducated. Most people think that the Confederate flag that you see all the time, it was the actual flag of the Confederacy, and it wasn't. That was a battle flag. And
yeah,
even the culture of the Civil War, why Americans were separating or fighting against each other. I mean, we're getting off topic. That has to be
yeah, a little off topic.
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that has to be explored also, because it wasn't necessarily just about blacks and slavery. America at that time, your state was your country, not the United States. Your state was your country, and General Lee was asked to fight with the Union Army, but he felt compelled to fight for Virginia, his country. Okay, but
Well, wasn't that
that's
because he wasn't it technically because he didn't want to fight his brothers and sisters on the battlefield? Didn't he
I
have
think it
like a
was only
calling
because he
to
was
blood?
loyal to his state. I think it was because he felt loyalty to his state, and he felt like that was his obligation since his state was seceding. He had to go with his state, I believe.
I
That was
think it
what I
has to
but
believe.
do either with family or his like not blood family, but so in the
well, the
military
state
people
was
tend to see each other as family members. So like
yeah, but the
he
state
didn't
was
want
the
to fight
family.
people he knew. The state
I
was
mean, he
his
didn't want
family.
to fight at all, but the state was
He
the
was good at
family.
fighting people he knew by fighting against the Union.
Yeah.
But the thing is with in Canada, where we're so well, I forget who it was. I think it was Mackenzie, William Lyon Mackenzie, who said we have too much geography. We're also very segregated by landmass, and it's so and Bruce Hutchison, a Canadian writer, said that Canada is a collection of huts and that hasn't found itself yet. And I think Canada now is starting to find itself that we want to be unified. Trudeau, you're not doing that. In fact, you're
Right.
doing the opposite, and that's one of the major driving forces that push this agenda. I mean, like I say, what you see on the surface is just the surface. Dig deep, and you'll find more and more and more.
Why
Yeah.
is the media uninterested in telling the story that you believe needs to be told? Do you think? Why are all these people, all these Canadians, made this massive movement doing this, and then the media just wants to not, in your opinion, not cover them
Well,
in a
that's
way,
just it.
wants to condemn them? Why?
I'm like I said, my family came here August 19th, 1665. So I'm a Canadian, and I don't
Okay.
like the idea. I do not accept, like Trudeau uses the term colonialism or colonialists, and another something else that we do is when we have a social event or a community event. This was the land of the whatever native nation
Mm-hmm.
that lived there before. What bothers me about all this is that we, people like myself, and then this gets into the racism now, are relegated as, well, you're thieves, you are colonialists. I've been considered guilty of genocide because when my family came here, they came with a regiment, a French regiment known as the Carignan Silière, and they were here to fight the Mohawk Wars. And I'm not taking responsibility for that. And historically, and I've explained this to people, they just don't want to hear this. And this is something I want to emphasize, especially on education. Human beings are migratory, and we have been migratory since Homo erectus started walking out of Africa. And yes, cultures die, species die. And this is what I was saying earlier that cultures they're born, they reach their height, and then they collapse and what have you. And the West has seen this, and they want to now say we want to preserve those cultures. But you see, we don't talk about that. All we talk about is what you did, what has happened in the past, and therefore that's what you are. You are that
Right.
past. You are the killer, the slave owner. I mean, you guys. Well, look at that critical race theory. No matter what you do, you're a racist. You can't
Yeah.
win. And that's
Okay.
partly what's happened. It's happened here in Canada. And I think it's probably worse here in Canada than in the States because we don't have a kind of a myth, if you will, that the Americans have.
What were you gonna
A
say, Nick?
About your
national.
country.
Oh, sorry. Finish up real quick.
I'm done. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Nick, you were trying to say something.
Do you
I
have a
was.
myth about your country that is positive, or a more deeply constructed culture that brings all Canadians together, like
We
America
could.
does, in your mind?
We could. You see, our culture is the land, the exploring, the bush pilots. Like nobody knows about our heroes. Um, we don't teach that. Um, we don't even teach, like for example, something as simple as art history. All we know about is the group of seven, and that's it. That's all Canada is. But no, we had art movements. We had political art movements like the Automatistes, which is a Quebec movement. I mean, I'm just sort of picking at straws here, but Canada has a history and a culture, but you see, that's not taught. Because you see, in order for me to say I'm a Canadian, this is my culture, this is my history, well, you're being a racist. You stole land. It's interesting. I had a discussion with a very left-wing individual that said, we live on stolen land. So I asked him, do you support taking in refugees and immigrants? So of course I do. You have then you are your own worst enemy. You told me that we don't belong here, and since you're obviously a European extraction, you don't have the right to say yes, we should take in refugees. It's not your land.
Who did the Canadians French cavalry fight? Was it the Iroquois?
I'm sorry, who did the?
Was it the Iroquois that the French?
It was the Mohawk. It was the Iroquois. The Mohawk was I can't remember how many 6 nations.
Because they have Mohawk warriors. I know that. I learned about the Mohawk warriors.
Yeah,
very good tacticians when it comes to like force fighting.
Yeah, Champlain, when he met the Odawa, they said, "Okay, we'll help you." And I'm just paraphrasing very quickly. We'll help you do what you want to do and help you with trade and what have you. But you've got to help us deal with the Iroquois or the Mohawk. I mean, there's this idea that the noble savage, that natives in North America lived in this kind of Arcadian utopia. Well, no, that's not true. It's not true. They warred against. Sorry?
Oh no, gotta keep going.
No, they warred against each other just like anybody else. But what? So, I guess I'm going off on a tangent, but this is partly. I guess this is what I'm talking about. That there is a history, good and bad, and any nation has to understand their history, what makes them a country. Trudeau wants to take that away from us.
So he wants to create.
He wants to create. He said, like I said, he said that Canada is a hollow husk, and he talks about the Great Reset. I think he wants to create a country in his own image, within his own political ideology, and I don't like it.
You guys want to get back to the video real quick after this?
Yeah, go ahead, show the video.
Okay.
Ottawa to protest the government's vaccine mandate for truck drivers. Truckers crossing the border have to be vaccinated or they will have to quarantine. Critics say the rule will affect already strained supply chains. So should the government be more flexible? Omar Alghabra is the Minister of Transport for Canada.
What?
I can't actually hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it?
Well, I heard that. No, but I heard him talk. It's like that. We believe in the freedom of expression, but
Well, what's the but? Because
the but is like you were saying about the flags and what have you, the symbols of hate. So that cancels out your free speech, and that's what Trudeau's done. We saw this flag. Okay, that cancels out free speech.
Well, wait. So the government. So at least in America, the government can't ban stuff because it's hateful. But generally, the utility of any protest movement in America falls apart very quickly whenever those symbols show up. That's kind of what I would say is that if your movement, at least if anyone showed up to my movement and was attracted to it, who was a Confederate or a Nazi, I wouldn't necessarily say my movement was wrong, but I would at least question it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that's what I would say, because normally people don't show up to movements with Nazi flags, randomly. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean?
It probably was a Fed, probably. I mean, the Feds have been known to provoke these protests, too.
Or it may not have. Like, you shouldn't just assume that the provocateurs can show up. But I wouldn't, assuming a government conspiracy is not normally the first thing I'd go to. Governments do conspire, but normally it's a lot of work, normally, like we shouldn't
You guys,
assume a conspiracy,
No, it's
especially
not a
you
because
guys,
conspiracy. It's a very likely thing. I'm not saying it's the truth, but you should be able to consider it and not just brush it off as a conspiracy theory. Think of
okay,
do you
okay,
guys know about Anonymous, the hacker group?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're basically run by the FBI. They're not anonymous hackers who are trying to fight the system. It's controlled by the system.
you have to
Things like the
get
CIA and
somebody to
FBI get
do it.
involved in protests like these all the time because they try to do it. Like, think of it this way: what's better for the American interest than influencing protests to draw away attention from their disparities?
There are law.
Well,
Hey,
maybe
first of
this
all,
will
there are
help you.
laws against that, and second of all, when they do it, if Congress ever finds out or anyone finds out, they get in major trouble.
No, they don't
Well,
because
let
they
me
all
And people
support
forget
it.
them.
The system's
okay. Let me share
completely
something with you guys.
corrupted.
Let me share something with you guys. You guys are young. I'm pushing 70. Okay, and I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, so I saw some pretty nasty things. Now, the reason I bring this up because the CTV, a news station, a television station in Canada, they were interviewing somebody, a woman. Well, she was black, and they were basically talking about Black Lives Matter and their marches and what have you, and trying to make a comparison. And essentially, the theme was like, these truckers are affluent. They're privileged, where we're fighting for what have you, and, stuff like this.
Uh-huh.
And
Was that true?
what gets lost? Well, what gets
Are the
lost is like,
truckers wealthy?
well, Black Lives Matter likes to talk about their lives or a life of a black man or a black person,
Okay.
like it was 50 years ago. Now, I'll give you an example what I'm talking about. When I was a boy, only about 13% of people accepted mixed marriages. Now
Okay.
it's over close to 90% accepted. It means nothing to us. The same with the gay. A person's gay. Oh, okay, that's fine. Whereas when I was young, that was just an abomination. The point I'm making is this: that we lack history, we lack education. What we are taught is a narrative. We're not taught to think. We're not taught to say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, in 1965, when Johnson introduced the war against poverty, there was only like 25%, if that, of single parent families, black single parent families. $26 trillion later, now you have over 80% single parent families. What's going on here? We don't want to reflect. We don't want to think. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. It'll exist, and when all of the three of us are long gone, it'll still exist, but it's getting less and less and less. That happens
Okay.
through education, wisdom, not legislation. If you legislate, you actually drive a wedge between people.
I think it depends on the legislation. Legislation can do all sorts of good things. Really, legislation is just legislation. It can do all sorts of good things. You can live in a society. If a society if half the people in society hate the other half the people in the society for X or Y reasons, and there's lots of inequalities in the society, there tends to be a lot of fights over that society and what it stands for, and there tends to be a lot of unhappiness, and I think a lot of the problems, at least today, trend from continued major inequality, which leads to kind of people's lack of belief in the society, and then they try to push for sort of social revolution,
Okay, and my argument to that is, okay, now tell me, what is equality? How are you going to guarantee equality? And that's the neo-left, as I refer to them in my book, which I'm going to be finishing up this month. So I hope I can get it published.
Congratulations.
One of the things I argue in this book is that we have created the delusion of equality. And especially in Canada, I think you have it in the States too. Not only do we push equality, we also want equality what's the word? I'm sorry.
Outcome.
Yes, equality of outcome. So how are you going to do that, especially when you've adopted intersectionality? Good luck. I mean, some people are endowed with special gifts, if you will. And you know what? That's just too bad. That's life. Some people are born into rich families, some are not. How are you going to fix that?
I don't know if
So
you could fix that. I think you could compensate for it quite a bit better in a lot of ways.
well,
For
your
example,
country
Band-aid it.
spent your
I
country
mean,
spent
bandage.
26 trillion your country spent $26 trillion on affirmative action since the 1960s. What has it done?
I mean, many of the people wouldn't be. Many of people, Colin Powell, major American leaders, Connie Rice, a lot of Americans benefited from those affirmative actions. Now, I don't know if affirmative action, is something that was an indefinite plan, but there were definite major beneficiaries in terms of the overall in the school systems, in terms of there were in terms of the rise of sort of a middle class in a lot of minority communities. And
You're missing. Yeah, but you know what? You know what you're missing, though.
what
Okay, something you're missing,
I'm
and
not.
something this whole argument, I mean, on a social scale, is missing.
Mhm,
Culture. Okay, I mean, we why Jews have been persecuted forever.
mhm,
The Chinese, the Asians, let's call it Asians, were persecuted, and
mhm,
and some were enslaved, some were sold as comfort women. I mean, they had to pay head tax. They had the worst jobs you can
mhm,
imagine. The one of the major driving forces for any people to grow is culture, family, these types of traditions. And then when you explore, if no one wants to do it, when you explore this phenomena, you see that Asians, well, right now they're on the top of the totem pole as far as economics, education, what have you. Jews, well, Asians as a whole, they do very well. But when you have broken families, broken cultures, then you're going to there's a there's a price for everything. And when, like, for example, when Black Lives Matter wants to rampage within its community and burn down its own community, and then they're saying we're poor, well, wait a minute, do the math. Okay, you talk about police shootings. Well, why is it 90% of males who are killed by are black on black killings? I'm not saying we shouldn't look at things like racism, police police brutality, and police. Okay, I'm the first. Look, I worked in social services. I worked in mental health. I've marched. I've fought for people to stay in Canada and what have you. But you know what? You also have to take responsibility, and that's the thing that gets lost in the translation. That we create victims. Victims are victims because many of them, not all of them, many of them they don't take responsibility for their life. Now, I grew up as a poor kid. That doesn't matter
mhm.
because, see, in our society, I'm white, I'm a male, I'm privileged. You don't know my life. I grew up very poor. I'm talking like dirt poor. We were
Okay.
homeless. Okay, but I still have the very first book I ever bought. I didn't want to be at least poor in my mental capacity, if you will. I educated myself. I have a high school. I don't even have high school, but I worked my way up in various jobs. Life is not fair, and it never will be fair. So going back to the equality, I mean, it's
I mean,
like,
I think if your attitude is that life isn't fair, too bad, so sad, like it's not going to go very far politically in the world. I'm not saying
Yes,
it's
but
not.
that's the problem. I'm not here to mollycoddle. I'm not saying this to you, okay? But I'm not here to mollycoddle you. Yeah, life is unfair. There is racism. There are idiots in this world. You either surrender to it or you rise above it. But if you remain a victim, if you play the victim card, that's where you're going to be.
I agree.
I mean, I
Playing the
can't.
victim card can be very detrimental to progress.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't. I
We
can't.
kind of
I
are getting
can't.
off topic a little bit though from the caravan.
Well,
Well,
in a sense, no, because you see,
Oh, okay.
the reason I say that, it's the whole genre of neo-leftist politics, as I refer to it in my book. Okay, that embraces the whole scheme, and when you put all this together into one pot, like, and for example, you've got some guy. Well, here's an example. Oprah Winfrey was during the Black Lives Matter marches and what have you. She was talking to three other black individuals about racism and what have you, and about privilege. So she was talking about a movie. I can't remember the title, but it was something about hillbilly life or whatever. It won awards and what have you. That okay, these people are poor. They live in like the Smoky Mountains and all that. They're poor. It's generation poverty that follows in one generation after another. But you know
uh-huh.
what? She says they still have the privilege of being white. Okay, so here's my argument. Oprah,
Okay.
you're worth $5 billion. You can hide behind your wealth, and you can hide behind your uh, privilege of victimhood because you're a black woman, going by the intersectional argument. Okay,
Okay.
so you go now. I wanted to communicate with her in some way. I wanted to say to her, you go to a family that's living on maybe $18,000 a year and having food stamps with little education, little future, and you tell them that they have um, privilege, and they're probably going to ask you, well, Oprah, when do we cash in on that privilege? I used to teach my students in social work, never politicize human suffering. You deal with the pain.
Okay.
Period. And
What do you?
we, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Nick. What's your response?
Um, I was going to say that, I mean, human pain does exist, and in a country like you do have to, maybe living in a, power oppression intersectional dynamic is probably not, very healthy for the country. But at the same time, if you just ignore suffering completely or something, or if you don't come up with effective solutions, because there's lots of government programs that don't work, right? There's a lot of government programs, that have been effective, but then, affirmative action has helped, but it's also maybe created some more problems in how people view stereotypes,
I
about
agree with
people
you.
not being qualified. So, but if you just if you have to meet people halfway in that in that you're not just completely ignoring it, but you're not just fixing it with something maybe doesn't work or has a band-aid solution.
Would you
If you
say
say
it's kind of like help out a little bit, but don't have your hands completely controlling their lives?
if you say to me, I believe in equal opportunity, I will fight and walk with you if, for that equal opportunity. If you're a young person of color and you have a skill, and if somebody has denied you because of whatever, I will be the first to say, that no, that is not happening. Okay, in any country not wise enough to support the idea of uh, equal opportunity will not do well. this is one of the reasons why in the West has done very well, because we do believe in equal opportunity. Is it perfect? Not by any stretch of the imagination. Are there ways and means of blocking somebody? Yes, that does exist, but not to the degree that the new left want to push the
Well,
agenda.
maybe there isn't, but maybe just, I mean, at least in America, we have a system which hasn't gone very far in the last 3 decades. You don't get, for example, your social disability, your social security payment isn't really much more than it was, indexed for inflation, 3 decades ago. Like
This is true.
there
We're getting into
there hasn't been an attempt to try to make things more really equal. We have lots of more people who are wealthy, but there hasn't really been an attempt to really lessen widespread suffering. There's been some nibbling around the corners, like we had a healthcare law, but there has not been that. There has been very little to, and that maybe is what's creating some of these more radical, I'm never saying radical, but why people latch on to social movements that push, if people aren't happy, that tends to, I go back into the Harry Truman, Harry Truman once said the path to, at least the path to communism was hunger, and that's why they supported the Marshall Plan, was to kind of get Europe on its feet.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, if at least in America, I don't know how much progress Canada has made.
I believe in intellectual honesty. I mean, I do a chapter on neo-capitalism. And now this is the capitalism we're experiencing today. I argue it's not the capitalism of Adam Smith. It's not the capitalism of the 1950s, 1960s. It's gone crazy. The average income has not gone up in 30 years. The middle class is dying. We live in one of the things I argue, we live in a credit economy. Try to live in a society without a credit card. Most families are one or two income away from poverty. I totally agree that, and I agree that young people, they have some legitimate complaints. I mean, the idea of a house at $1 million, the coming out of a university completely up to their neck in debt, they're stuck in debt peonage. I have issues about that, and yes, those things have to be addressed. And I mean, like I say, I don't believe we live in a perfect society. I never have said that. We do have concerns, we do have problems, and I think the young people who are marching should be heard, but I think what young people are doing is, well, you're going at it. They're not, like I say, you go back to education. They're not. You may have an education, but you're not educated. They don't know history. They don't even know their own culture. I mean, they look upon their own culture like, look at the idea of the West. The idea of the West. We got to destroy the West. Where do you think the sovereignty of the individual came from? It came from the West. It was the West that destroyed slavery.
Nick, what were you gonna say?
If you to go back to I think, and this is one thing, especially with America, there's a saying, if you don't give a child, if the child doesn't get attention, he'll burn the village down to feel its warmth.
Yep.
That's an old phrase, and I would say that if that continued lack stagnation is just going to propel more, radical change. People aren't going to find value in maybe the West, or people aren't going to find value in the society that we've created, because to them if it's not giving them what they need or desire, they might look for a new society, and they might look for whatever.
People are looking at America, and they're looking at Canada, and they're looking at England.
Yeah.
Okay, but understand something. I know this sounds corny, but the sustaining fabric of any society, at least in the West, is being eroded. The idea of the family and what have you, that doesn't exist anymore. Kids, there's a term called proximal abandonment. Now, what a proximal abandonment is, you have a mom, you have a dad, they're at home, you have a problem, but you can't talk to them. They are so busy trying to make a buck to pay the bills, they're exhausted, they're burnt out, so you don't have a parents you can go to. So you go to your friends or your siblings or whatever, but children need adult supervision. They need adult care. They need the care of family. You take that factor away, then there's going to be a comeuppance. I mean, again, I'm going to bring this. I keep bringing this up. I reiterate this over and over in my book. It's called responsibility. There's no such thing as freedom. There's no such thing as give me this and everything will be fine. Everything you get, everything you do has a price. It's like the environment. What are you? I mean, what's her name?
Nick?
Greta Thunberg.
Okay.
She talks about, the thing that bothers me about her is not, I think it's great that, a young person is speaking up. But, if you're going to enter the world of science and the world of adults, then you have to be prepared to be challenged because some of your ideas may be wrong. That being
Well, she
said,
doesn't really spread much ideas, though. She spreads more like emotional fear mongering.
The environment's become the new religion, and the new, I know what I say in my book, the new millennialism. That it's like, you see that guy carrying the sign, repent, the end is coming, that kind of thinking. Now,
you don't have, that's because they haven't seen the progress in their time to justify when you don't see good things. When you look at when a lot of millennials look at the world, they don't see a lot of positives. If you give them negatives to see, they're going to go towards negative. They're going to see things negatively. My generation saw 9/11, the financial crisis.
I agree with you 100%.
Protests with
That's where the
Confederate
teaching of history needs to come in, though, right?
That's right. I mean, it's like going back to the environment. You should see what it was like in my time. We have made progress. Do we have to make more? Of course we do. Whether you believe in the environmental movement or not, act as if you do. I mean, you treat the earth with respect and with because that is your home. But I see all these kids walking around with their signs and their pretty colored banners attacking the corporation. Well, the corporation is just what you want. So it starts with you. This is where I agree with Jordan Peterson. Before you start going out and changing the world, make sure your bedroom is cleaned up. It makes sense. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to curb your carbon footprint?
Speaking of Jordan Peterson, let's finish this video and we'll start closing things up. Does that sound good for both of you?
Yeah.
What's that, Nick?
Sure.
Okay. Tell me if you can hear this. I tried changing the output.
To us about this issue, Minister.
Do you hear anything?
Well, he's not saying anything right now.
Al Gabra is in
Mississauga.
Mississauga. Thanks for joining us once again on the program.
Okay. I don't think it's gonna work then.
You broke it.
I broke it. I'm just so bad. We're so. Go ahead.
I can give a quick synopsis. He talked about the very cliche kind of response, that we believe in the right to free speech and protest and what have you, but when it comes to hate speech and what have you, that abrogates everything. Okay, and he refers to the symbols of hate. That to me is whitewashing. Okay, it's just because we saw one Nazi flag or one statue was defaced, everyone's whitewashed as racist and what have you. Yet, remember I spoke about the CTV interviewing this lady about Black Lives Matter. And when they bring up the issue about the monuments, being defaced, basically all they did was put flags over them. They didn't say anything about, well, with Black Lives Matter, you guys kind of burned a lot of cities. You tore down statues, and people were killed. And well, no, you can't talk about that.
Yeah, we have a
Okay.
famous elk statue here in Portland that was, excuse me, completely removed because it was defaced, lit on fire, spray painted.
Hmm.
It hasn't come out of
Okay.
hiding. No one knows where it's at. People think it's
The one,
underground, but no one knows where it's at
okay,
because the protesters
the
that
one
took over
thing,
my city
yeah,
had just destroyed the entire park.
I wouldn't. I
yeah,
wouldn't.
the thing. Go ahead.
I wouldn't compare. I guess if you're stuck, if you're comparing your protests to how people view Black Lives Matter, I'm just gonna say that seems like a sort of a loser of an argument because every
I
protest is judged
agree.
by whatever
I, I'm,
it does, and if it does stuff that's a problem, it doesn't really matter whether or not another protest movement was worse or the media didn't cover it or of that other protest movement or doesn't want to talk about it. Every protest movement is judged by the people and whatever they do, and whether or not someone's worse or better. Another protest movement, I think the public is going to
Yes or
judge
no
each movement
question.
by whatever happens at that movement.
I agree
No
with you
matter what.
100%. And I was upset. Like, why are you bringing this up? Let's deal with the truckers' freedom
Caravan.
push here. Okay. Now, the one thing I think that kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about, and I've said a lot, and I apologize. I've gone on a tangent sometime. We live in North America, which developed over the 40 years, is a culture of self-hate. And I think people are starting to say enough is enough. We're tired of this. We're tired of being told we're guilty for genocide, we're guilty for this, or we're guilty for that, that our homes are not our homes, we're thieves and vagabonds. And I think in Canada, I think Canadians here have had enough. And I think this is kind of like part of the driving force of the movement that enough. We're tired of this. Okay, well, you can talk about the mandates. You're taking rights away, and to some degree, yeah, the government has been. But don't let's not dwell on that. Let's explore what's really driving this, so we can make a change and correct the problem. Trudeau doesn't want to do that because Trudeau has a narrative. He has an ideology, and he's going to hold on to that come hell or high water. I mean, even the conservative politicians are arguing with him. How can you take one incident, i.e., the Nazi flag, and then you paint the entire movement as white racists? And the liberals just fall back on their, we believe in love, and this
It's
kind of,
because of
I
the
hear you.
article saying Nazi flags, plural,
Yeah,
have
You
been
could,
found
uh,
in the protest, and it's like one, so it should be a singular statement.
yeah.
well, if you, I would suggest, and maybe I'm crazy, but
Oh,
if
you're
you
fine.
want to have a movement that is not associated with Nazism, having having if there's a Nazi flag, instead of having like a Canada flag, having a sort of movement flag by itself would be good. That's kind of its own flag to separate yourself from that type of movement. I guess, does that make sense? Because if you have,
Well, I think
Well,
where
what
you're
can you
going has.
do?
I think I know where Nick's going with this, and I think that one of the things your generation lacks, okay, is the language of revolution. Okay, for example, what in 2008, you had the 99%. Okay, what do they call it? I can't remember the term they used.
1%, the Occupy
No,
Wall.
the 99%, the movement that was so angry. Basically, they represented the working people and what have you.
Yeah, Occupy
Anyway,
Wall.
the term, I forgot the title they used. The problem with that movement, it didn't have leadership and it didn't have a single purpose. Okay, so and I use the analogy of in describing the truckers movement, the point of an arrow. The point of the arrow is the mandate, but what follows is everything else, and that's not what's being pushed. As long as now, to be honest, I think this push, if you will fail because that's all they're holding on to is just the mandate. And now, if they're
That's what
now,
most of the time talk about.
some have argued that, well, we don't like Trudeau's leadership because he's taken away freedoms and what have you. Okay, let's push on that. Let's challenge the government. This is about freedom, period. Mandates or not. There's a long history where our freedom is being questioned or taken away from us. And that's what's not being told. That's what's lost in translation.
Okay. Well, I was telling Autumn this, I think, in another chat a little while ago, that when you start taking a movement that has one simple purpose, like you're more likely to succeed if you have one purpose, like the mandates, and then build on that. But whenever you start adding in laundry lists, people's eyes start to glaze over, like of demands. You can't.
Okay,
Something is the simpler something is, the better it is. The more complex it is, like people have a lot of different beliefs about culture and Canadian culture, probably Canadians even do, I'm guessing, and American culture. So once you start getting into if you have a simple thing that kind of brings everyone together, like it's better to at least initially work on that one thing than trying to think of 50 other things that might divide everyone. That's how a lot of movements fall apart.
I'm going to a protest in Queen's Park on Saturday. If a reporter was to ask me, why are you here? I would say this. Initially, yes, the mandates. I'm not necessarily against the vaccination, but I'm against the process by which the vaccinations are being forced upon people, which is tantamount to the way Trudeau has controlled and run this country. And that's the issue, is that I'm going to push. It's not about just the mandates, it's about government control. Right. And people have said that in a roundabout way, that you can't tell me how to live my life. I have a right to my body, my right. Okay, and they have a point too. Where Trudeau makes the mistake is that by his self-righteous arrogance, I'm not going to talk to these people. That's the end of it. If I were the prime minister, I would have said I disagree with them in principle, but I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to talk. If they want to have representatives come to me, let's do it. Now, that is an old social work teaching. I used to let people feel they've been heard. They may not get what they want. They may not get what they want, but people want to be heard. And a lot of Canadians are feeling like the middle class, especially, for example, we're not being heard. We're told we're terrible people. We're told we're thieves and racists and what have you. Oh, wait a minute. I've got kids who are sick. I have a parent that's dying. I have no job. I mean, when I hear politicians saying, we're all in this together. No, you're not. You get your pay. You get the benefits. Some poor slob working at minimum wage, he or she has lost their job. It ain't coming back. There's going to be a massive wave of bankruptcies and homeless. As I've said many a time, we haven't received the COVID bill yet. And when we do, it's going to be massive.
Well, I think it's a good time to close up, everyone. Thank you for those who are watching. If you like what you see, hit that like button. If you don't, well, there's no dislike button, so it doesn't matter what you think. All kidding aside, hit that subscribe button for more content from us. And if you want to stay up to date and you're not receiving notifications, hit that bell to get more notifications sent to you directly. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Nick. I think this was a very pleasantful and fruitful conversation. Maybe sometime
It
we
was a
could
pleasure.
continue it. I'm sorry that we
Pleasure to
didn't get
talk to
through the
both of you.
video.
It's fine.
That's- Anyway, have a good night, and thank you, both of you. I enjoyed this very much.
If you can both stay on for just a second, I'm just going to cancel
Sure.
the stream real quick. And to everyone watching on YouTube, thank you.